Her son buried her husband without telling her, then blocked her number. Marjorie Hale, widow of 44 years, didn't scream. Tanner, her only child and once legal heir, called it a kindness and walked away. By week's end, his name was stripped from the trust, the deed, and every decision he thought he controlled. She'd spent a lifetime as his mother. Now she was the executor of her own vengeance, and when the courts asked who had authority, the record showed her signature, not his. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The text came at 7:42 a.m., just as the morning sun lit the far wall of Marjorie Hale's adobe living room. She was stirring honey into her tea when her phone buzzed. "I just heard about Alan. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Hale. He was a giant to all of us." Nathan, 97. The cup trembled slightly in her hand. She stared at the message, then read it again. "Alan?" She pressed her thumb to the message, checked the date. Today, her stomach cinched. A wave of cold flushed down her spine. Alan was in hospice care. Yes, but he hadn't. No, no one had called. Not the doctors, not the hospice nurse, not her son. She set the cup down carefully, walked to the kitchen window, and stared out into the high desert light, her breath fogging the glass. Everything was still. Too still. Marjorie picked up her landline and called the hospice facility. A chirpy receptionist confirmed Alan had passed 2 days ago. "We were told all communication was being handled by Mr. Tanner Hale," the woman said politely. Marjorie didn't respond. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She felt herself slipping, her knees folding under her. The phone dropped to the floor. She landed hard on the tiled kitchen floor, one hand catching the edge of the cabinet. Her hips screamed in protest. 2 days. They buried him 2 days ago. Her breathing turned shallow. She crawled to the nearest chair and pulled herself up with both hands, clutching the armrest like a drowning woman grabbing driftwood. Hands shaking, she grabbed her cell phone. She called Tanner. He answered on the third ring, sounding more annoyed than concerned. "Hey, what's going on?" Her voice cracked. "When were you going to tell me?" There was a long pause. "Mom, we didn't want to upset you. You weren't in the best place for all that." "All what?" she whispered. "All what, Tanner?" Kara's voice broke in. He'd put it on speaker. "It was just quicker this way. You'd have made it a whole ordeal. And we thought honestly, it was kinder." "Kinder?" The word lodged in her throat. She stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, the phone like a stone in her hand. "Where did you bury him?" "Let it go, Mom," Tanner said. "It's done." "Where?" He hung up. Marjorie stood there, the phone still pressed to her ear, listening to the nothingness. The silence was so loud it buzzed inside her skull. Her hands moved mechanically, slipping the phone into her cardigan pocket. Walking to the coat rack, she pulled on her heavier sweater, even though the sun had already warmed the clay-colored walls. She went to the bedroom. Alan's glasses still sat on the nightstand, his slippers still under the bed. His robe hung from the back of the door like he might come back and reach for it at any moment, but he was underground. Somewhere, without her. Her knees nearly buckled again. She clutched the door frame and leaned into it, letting the weight of her body sag. She forced herself upright, crossed the room, opened the top drawer of the dresser. Alan's funeral pre-arrangement documents were still there in her name, her authority, her instructions. None of this made sense. Unless they'd ignored her entirely. She pulled out the papers, her hands trembling now with something colder than shock. She was being erased. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the silent phone in her lap. The air in the room was too thin. A slow, icy certainty settled inside her. They didn't just bury her husband, they buried her role, her rights, her place beside him. But she would dig it all back up, every last piece. The door to Emmett Klein's law office creaked softly as Marjorie stepped inside, her shoes brushing faintly against the edge of a southwestern rug, faded from sunlight and time. The place smelled faintly of cedar, old books and legal dust. Emmett looked up from his desk, reading glasses perched low on his nose. His lined face softened when he saw her. "Marjorie." He rose slowly. "I was just about to call you. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Alan's dead. They buried him without me. Emmett exhaled through his nose, as if bracing for something he already knew. He gestured for her to sit, his tone grave. I was told, yesterday, by Delia Barnes over at the funeral home, but I hadn't spoken with you yet. I thought, God, Marjorie, I thought you were the one handling it. I was, she said. According to Alan, according to every document in my dresser drawer. Emmett opened a leather folder. Inside were copies of their estate planning documents, familiar signatures, notarized stamps. He tapped one page with the back of his pen. You're the legal next of kin, Marjorie, not Tanner, not his wife. They had zero right to authorize burial or arrangements without your express consent. Marjorie sat in still silence. A long moment passed before she said, then what they did was illegal. Yes, Emmett replied, voice steady. And we're going to address that. She nodded once, the motion sharp. By noon she had filed a formal complaint with the New Mexico Board of Funeral Services. Emmett would handle the legal end, but it was Delia Barnes who requested the meeting. They met that same afternoon in a small conference room behind the funeral home, away from clients and caskets. Delia looked older than she had a week ago, something in her eyes hollowed out. She folded her hands on the table. Mrs. Hale, I owe you more than an apology. Marjorie didn't speak. She watched the woman carefully, her grief cooling into something colder than rage, clarity. They came in the morning after Alan passed. Delia began, her voice barely above a whisper. They said you were too ill to handle the arrangements. They insisted Alan wanted it simple, quick, no services. They lied, Marjorie said flatly. Delia nodded, eyes shining. I should have asked for the original documents. I should have verified the power of attorney. I didn't. They were insistent, and frankly intimidating. Marjorie's expression didn't shift. And you let them bury my husband without me. Delia swallowed. They signed the release. We were short-staffed that day. She caught herself. No excuses. I've submitted my statement to the board already. I'll provide anything you need for legal grounds. Marjorie stood. Good. Then give me the location. Delia did. Scribbled it quietly on a slip of paper, hands trembling. The sun was starting to lower when Marjorie pulled up the dirt path to the cemetery's edge. It wasn't a public space, but it wasn't private either. Just a square of sun-bleached land behind a chain-link fence, where tumbleweeds leaned against crooked headstones, and the wind dragged sand through rusted flower holders. She walked slowly. Her shadow stretched across the gravel like a second spine. There were no fresh flowers, no memorial marker yet. Just a flat temporary plaque staked into the hard earth. Alan Hale, 1947-2025. Her husband, her life's companion, 44 years, placed into the ground like a forgotten errand. Marjorie dropped to her knees, her hands pressed into the soil. The warmth of the sun still clung to it, but it felt wrong, foreign. She leaned forward until her forehead touched the dry earth. For a long time she said nothing. Then she whispered, voice low, steady, cutting through the wind. You're not staying here. She rose slowly, brushing dust from her skirt, her eyes never leaving the name on the plaque. She turned and walked away without looking back. The courthouse smelled like paper and mildew. Marjorie sat across from a county clerk, who kept glancing nervously at the notarized documents spread across the counter. Alan's original burial directive, the power of attorney, the formal request for exhumation. She didn't fidget, she didn't blink, she only watched. The clerk finally cleared her throat. This should have gone through you, not them. Marjorie simply nodded. It still can. Later that afternoon, Emmett filed the motion with the county probate court, attaching Delia's affidavit as a formal exhibit. The funeral home director had signed every page with visible sorrow, initialing next to phrases like unauthorized consent and administrative failure. Her penmanship trembled by the time she finished. By the end of the day, the judge had issued a tentative hearing date. It was happening. The next morning, Tanner pounded on her door. Marjorie didn't flinch when the knock came. She was already standing in the front room, tea cooling in her hand. She opened the door without a word. Tanner stood on the porch in a wrinkled button-down, jaw tight, lips curled inward like he was trying not to explode. "You filed for exhumation?" Marjorie didn't answer right away. She stepped aside, letting the silence stretch. The desert wind hissed through the wind chimes behind him. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "He doesn't belong in that place." "You're making this ugly," Tanner snapped. "It's over, Mom. It was done respectfully, quietly. You're just, not until he's home," she said. "Then it's over." His fists clenched. He stared at her like he didn't recognize her. Then he stormed off without another word. By noon, Kara had posted a pastel-toned image on her social media, a watercolor sketch of a weeping willow, with the words, "Some people just can't move on," in cursive script. The caption underneath read, "Letting go is the hardest thing, especially for those who weren't ready to say goodbye." Marjorie didn't respond. She simply took a screenshot, saved it in a folder she'd labeled Documentation Emotional Harassment. That evening, just as the sun was turning the hills into golden ember, Noelle showed up at the front gate. She wore a faded hoodie and Converse sneakers, and her backpack swung low behind her. Marjorie opened the door before she could knock. Noelle didn't say hello. She just walked inside, dropped her bag by the entry table, and wrapped her arms around her grandmother in a quiet, fierce hug. "They didn't even cry," she whispered into Marjorie's shoulder. "Not once." Marjorie felt her throat tighten, but she didn't cry either. She rested her chin on Noelle's head and closed her eyes. "I know," she said. Noelle pulled back. "What you're doing, it's right. It's what he would have wanted." Marjorie gave her a sad smile. "It's what he wrote down." Noelle nodded and opened her backpack. Inside was a small, dog-eared album, photos from the last Christmas they'd all spent together. The one where Alan had worn the old Marine cap and made corny toasts in his slippered feet. "Want me to help scan these?" Noelle asked. Marjorie looked at the girl, her sharp eyes, the quiet fury blooming just beneath her calm exterior, and something in her heart exhaled. "Yes," she said. "Let's make sure people remember the real story." As they sat down at the dining table, the printer hummed to life, scanning memories into permanence. Outside, a single hawk wheeled silently in the amber sky, circling above the desert. Inside, Marjorie clicked Save As on the first image. File name, Reclaiming His Place. JGG. The graveyard sat on the northern edge of town, where the land bowed into soft hills and the pinyon trees grew in quiet, uneven rows. The sun always hit this place gently, as if it understood the difference between loss and erasure. Marjorie stood beside a low wooden fence, hands folded, her breath catching at the view. She remembered walking this very path with Alan 10 years earlier, when they'd visited the cemetery on a whim after brunch. He'd joked about how peaceful it looked, then squeezed her hand and said, "Not a bad place to land, huh?" Now it would be. The Hale family plot had been established 3 generations ago, long dormant, until now Delia met her there, clipboard in hand, her black slacks dusty at the cuffs. She said little, and Marjorie didn't mind. Together they paced the space. Delia took careful measurements. Marjorie stopped beneath a flowering desert willow. "Here," she said softly. "This is where he'd want to be." Delia nodded and took notes. "We'll do it right this time, Miss Hale," with reverence. In the days that followed, Emmett worked from his private study, drafting revisions to the Hale estate protections, meticulously restructuring every clause. The trust was locked tighter, beneficiaries reassigned, rights redrawn like borders on a war map. When he called Marjorie with updates, his voice carried a note she hadn't heard before, respect edged with awe. "You've thought of everything," he said. "No," Marjorie replied, "I just remembered everything they hoped I'd forget." The reburial was set for the following Friday, just after dawn. No public notice, no family-wide announcement. Just 3 names on the guest list: Delia, Emmett, and Noelle. Marjorie sent each of them a handwritten note, ink thick, the paper pressed with the faint scent of lavender and cedar. She sealed them with care. Then the cease and desist arrived. Kara's name was printed at the top of the letterhead in awkward script, a generic online legal template. She had accused Marjorie of emotional manipulation, undue interference, and family asset hostility. Marjorie slid the paper across Emmett's desk with a raised brow. He read it once, snorted, and dropped it into his shredder without comment. "She's trying to dress a tantrum in legalese," he said. "We'll respond with facts, which, unlike her, we have." The next night, as the air turned purple over the desert ridge, Noelle's phone rang. Tanner's name lit up the screen. She frowned, but answered. He didn't yell. That was worse. His voice was hushed, pleading. "Noelle, please, don't go. It's already been handled. Your grandma's turning it into a show." Noelle sat on the edge of Marjorie's front steps, the adobe wall behind her still warm from the day's sun. "You didn't even tell her he was gone," she said. "You buried your father while she was still making his tea." Silence. Then a strained breath. "It wasn't meant to be like this." "But it is like this," she said, and hung up. Inside, Marjorie was packing a small cedar box. Alan's medals. A folded flag, the letter they'd both signed years ago when they'd pre-planned their wishes. Hers in cursive, his in all caps, like he always wrote. She added one more thing, a photo. The last one Noelle had scanned. Alan's arm wrapped around her, the marine cap crooked on his head, grinning like he'd just said something ridiculous. She pressed her hand to the glass and shut the box. The morning was coming. So was justice. But first, she had to stand at the grave again, one more time, and leave something behind. The desert was still asleep when the hearse arrived. A pale lavender glow stretched over the eastern horizon, brushing the chain-link fence that enclosed the temporary burial ground. The silence was thick, broken only by the crunch of gravel beneath careful steps and the faint rustle of wind, tugging at dry brush. Delia stood at the edge of the plot, clipboard tucked under one arm, gloved hands clasped in front of her like she was guarding something sacred. A dark wool coat shielded her from the early morning chill. Her eyes followed every movement, the quiet lift of the soil, the precise coordination of the crew, the respectful silence maintained by all present. She didn't have to say it out loud this time. "We get it right." Marjorie stood 10 feet away, arms folded tightly, her expression unreadable in the soft blue light. She hadn't spoken much during the drive. Noelle sat beside her now, shoulder to shoulder, small and steady like a weight that kept the wind from carrying Marjorie off completely. The casket surfaced slowly, pin wood, plain, simple, just as Alan had asked for. Delia gave a nod and the crew backed away, allowing space. Marjorie stepped forward alone. Her fingers hovered over the grain of the wood for a moment before finally resting on it, firm and flat, like a hand placed against a chest that used to breathe. "You waited," she murmured, low enough that only the wind caught it. From her coat pocket she withdrew a letter. It was sealed in a heavy linen envelope, edges trimmed with gold foil. She walked back to the temporary plaque, now leaning askew in the dry earth. Using a strip of tape she'd brought in her purse, she affixed the envelope to the stone's front, right above the engraved name. It read, in her hand, "To those who stood on this soil without permission, may you stand with the weight of it forever." She didn't look back. By the time the caravan reached the private Hale family plot, the sun had cleared the hills and the cemetery shimmered softly under its first full light. The desert willow cast long shadows across the grass. The new site was pristine, the freshly dug plot marked with white flags and smoothed soil. A modest arch of wildflowers stood behind it. Noel's work gathered the day before from the edges of town and tied with twine. The casket was lowered in silence. No readings, no songs, just the hush of mourning and the sound of boots on dirt. Marjorie stepped forward once more, but this time she held a small folded paper. She unfolded it slowly as though it might tear from memory alone. "I wrote these down," she said softly. 44 years ago, under a cottonwood tree, wearing a dress I sewed myself and shoes I couldn't feel through the nerves in my feet." Her voice didn't waver. "I will hold your hand through silence and through storms. I will guard your dignity when you can no longer speak. I will love you fiercely. when the world forgets how. She paused. The paper trembled slightly, and then she folded it back into her palm. Noel reached out and took her hand. Delia lowered her head. Emmett stood back respectfully outside the circle, but nodded once like someone signing the bottom of a verdict already rendered. A soft beep came from Delia's phone. She glanced at it, then turned to Marjorie. "The court's order has been publicly posted," she said. "The burial record has been amended." Marjorie let out a long, slow breath. She didn't smile, but her eyes lifted. "It's official?" Noel whispered. "It's public," Marjorie replied. And that was the twist. Not just that he had been moved, but that it was recorded, documented, certified, etched into the public record, like a scar, proving exactly what they had done behind her back. The burial had happened without her, but the correction bore her name. And now anyone who ever went searching for Alan Hale would find her signature beside his. On Sunday morning, Marjorie sat at the dining table in a soft robe, her glasses perched low on her nose, hands poised above the keyboard. The obituary form blinked on the screen, cursor waiting. The room around her was still, except for the faint clink of wind chimes outside and the steady murmur of Noel printing photos in the corner. Marjorie took a breath, long and grounding, then began typing. Alan James Hale, beloved husband of Marjorie Ann Hale, née Whitman, married June 2, 1881, survived by his wife and granddaughter Noel Hale. She paused, then added, also survived by his son. That was it. No mention of Tanner's career, no hollow words about legacy, no florid praise they hadn't earned. She moved to the next line. Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. Decorated veteran, teacher of woodworking, collector of terrible puns, keeper of quiet wisdom. He loved sweet tea, the sound of desert rain, and the woman who knew how to sharpen his chisels. Her fingers hovered again, then typed. A private reburial was held at the Hale family plot. His wishes were honored in full. She submitted it to the Santa Fe Tribune before noon. A few hours later, it was live on the site. Headshot included. One of Alan in uniform, cropped from a photo Marjorie had almost thrown away during the first week of mourning. By Monday morning, the messages started. A woman from their old neighborhood. I just saw the obituary. I thought the funeral already happened. You weren't there? A former student. I'm shocked. No one told me. Alan tutored my son for free after school. I would have come. The inbox filled slowly but relentlessly. Marjorie responded to only one. No, I wasn't told. But he's home now. The next day, Kara struck back. She posted a glossy photo collage on Facebook. Alan in the garden. Alan at Noel's first birthday party. Alan holding a trout beside a lake he hadn't visited in 15 years. The caption read, "We honored him quietly, just as he would have wanted." Family means protecting each other, even when others stir old grief. Thank you for understanding. The post was up for 3 hours before comments began appearing beneath it. I thought Marjorie was his wife. Why didn't she get to say goodbye? This doesn't sit right. One local reporter shared the original Tribune obituary, with a quote from the estate filing. Emmett had made it public. Per legal record, Mrs. Marjorie Hale was the designated next of kin and executor of final arrangements. The tone of the online discussion shifted. Kara deleted her post by sunset. That evening, Marjorie stepped out onto the back porch with a mug of tea. The sky was streaked with fire-orange clouds, the kind Alan used to call desert gasoline. Delia called just as she sat down. I saw the article, she said. Your version's traveling further than theirs ever will. Marjorie sipped quietly. People remember truth when it's written plain. Delia exhaled into the line. And people are starting to ask questions about how it happened, about who signed what. Marjorie didn't smile, but she closed her eyes for a long moment. Good. Let them dig. Let the dirt that covered Alan reveal everything they tried to bury with him. She opened her eyes again and clicked open the next email in her inbox. The subject line read, "We'd like to hear your side." KRQE News 13. Marjorie didn't make an announcement. She just walked into the bank in a pressed blazer and clean-lined slacks, with Alan's death certificate in one hand and a sealed trust packet in the other. The woman behind the counter blinked when she saw her. "Would you like a manager for this?" "Yes," Marjorie said calmly. "Someone who understands estate protocols." By the end of the meeting, Tanner's name had been removed from every joint account. The retirement beneficiary had been reassigned. Her new primary heir was listed in 2 places: Noel Whitman Hale. No questions. No drama. Just pen strokes and updated folder. That same afternoon, Emmett filed the new trust agreement. His assistant, a young man with a military haircut and a trembling hand, handed Marjorie a copy with a subtle bow of the head. "It's good work," he murmured. "Thorough. Final." Marjorie nodded once and tucked the trust into her leather bag. Emmett looked up from his desk. "They're going to feel this?" "They should," she said, standing. "But that's not why I did it." He waited. "I did it," she said, "because Noelle never asked for anything, and she deserves everything they tried to steal." Meanwhile, Kara had started calling. Voicemails, text, emails, all of them clumsy attempts to feign concern or outrage. She used vague legal threats one day, tears the next. Emmett listened to one of the messages on speaker. "Hi Emmett. I'm just trying to understand what's happening. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I mean, Alan always said we'd... Well, I'm sure there's a way we can fix this. Just please call me back." He pressed delete. "She's fishing," he said, "but she's in the wrong river." Tanner, for his part, didn't call. Instead, he drove out to the Hale family plot, uninvited, unannounced, and found the gates locked. A newly posted placard read, "Private property, access by prior arrangement only. For inquiries, contact the Hale Foundation." He rattled the gate, waited, took a step back and stared at the new headstone from a distance. It was small, clean, engraved in understated script. "Alan James Hale, 1947-25, husband, grandfather, Marine, home at last." A groundskeeper approached, clipboard in hand. "You on the list?" Tanner didn't answer. He just turned and left, his shoes crunching against gravel that no longer belonged to him. That week, Marjorie opened a modest P.O. box and filed paperwork with the state for a charitable nonprofit, the Alan Hale Foundation for Veterans and Family Dignity. Its mission, helping families navigate end-of-life legalities with dignity and catching exactly the kind of betrayal she'd lived through. The first grant came from a retired neighbor who sent a handwritten check with the words, "For what you stood up and stood through." At the grief group that Thursday, Marjorie sat in her usual spot, 3rd chair from the end, back row. She hadn't spoken in 3 weeks, but tonight, when the facilitator opened the floor, she raised her hand. "When someone dies, we talk about how they went," she said, voice steady. "But what we don't talk about is how people behave around the dying, how power shifts, how silence gives cowards a stage." A few people nodded. A tissue passed quietly down the row. "I was quiet for 2 days after Alan died," she continued. "Then I got up and I went to war." She looked up, her gaze didn't shake. "Because silence," she said, "is where abuse hides. So I spoke." No one clapped. No one needed to. The stillness afterward held more weight than applause ever could. She stood, picked up her coat, and turned to leave. As she reached the door, her phone buzzed. One new voicemail, from a number she didn't recognize. She stepped outside into the cool night air and played it. A woman's voice, cautious, strained. "Mrs. Hale, I worked at the funeral home the day your husband was brought in. I think there's something you should know." The sun hadn't risen yet when Marjorie parked at the cemetery gate. She stepped out with a thick manila envelope clutched to her chest. The air was cool, not cold, the kind of desert quiet that muffled even the birds. She didn't bring flowers. Just the letter. The new headstone sat under the arching branches of the willow tree. Noel's memorial sapling had taken root nearby, its young leaves already shimmering silver in the half-light. Marjorie knelt slowly, her knees pressing into the soft earth. She unfolded the letter. It was 6 pages, front and back, handwritten in her careful cursive. The top left corner bore a small smudge. She'd cried once, halfway through, but only once. She didn't read it aloud. She just placed it beneath a smooth river stone at the base of the headstone, right next to the rose-colored soil. Then she whispered, "I'm sorry." Another pause. Then, "But I brought you home." Her hand lingered on the cool edge of the stone before she stood. Noelle arrived minutes later, with 2 mugs of coffee and a folded sheet of paper sticking out of her back pocket. "You okay?" Marjorie nodded. "I did what I had to. What no one else would." They walked a few paces to the newly planted memorial tree. Noelle pulled out her paper, cleared her throat, and began reading. The poem wasn't hers, it was Carl Sandburg, Alan's favorite, one he used to recite when the power went out, and the candles flickered low. "I am the grass, I cover all." Her voice didn't crack, but when she finished, she stood silent, her eyes on the horizon. Marjorie reached for her hand. Noelle took it. Behind them, Delia approached with a leather folder tucked neatly beneath her arm. Her expression was somber but composed. "I brought these," she said softly. "The full internal logs, transport records, authorization forms, originals and copies." Marjorie accepted the folder without speaking. She flipped briefly through the contents. Tanner's signature, sloppily scrawled. Kara's name printed on a line marked "Informal Witness." The dates didn't match what they'd claimed. Delia added quietly, "We found a backdated entry in the system. Someone tried to make it look like you declined to be contacted." Marjorie didn't blink. "And now it's corrected, documented, sealed." That afternoon, Marjorie sat at her kitchen table and sorted through old address books. She pulled out a stack of ivory envelopes and began writing. No notes, no explanation, just a copy of the funeral home's corrected report, and one brief line, "In case you were wondering where the truth was." Each envelope bore a familiar name: Alan's cousin in Phoenix, his Navy buddy in Albuquerque, the pastor from their first even her old friend Iris, who'd gone quiet after reading Kara's obituary post. Noelle helped to fix the stamps. By evening they were mailed. 2 days later, Emmett called with a chuckle buried under his usual gravel. "You've been served," he said. Kara's sent a formal demand letter. Claims emotional distress, potential defamation, irreparable harm to her character. Marjorie didn't flinch. "Did you shred it?" "Not yet," he said. "But it's warming the machine." "Good," she said. "I want it warm for what's coming next." She hung up, walked to the porch, and stood beneath the sky. The clouds were rolling in slow and low, and the first hint of distant thunder pulsed through the quiet. A storm was building. Inside, her landline rang. She picked it up. The voice on the other end was the same woman from the voicemail. "Mrs. Hale, we didn't speak earlier, but I was there when they brought him in. Tanner told us not to list you. He said there'd be consequences if we did." Marjorie gripped the receiver, the cord twisting between her fingers. "Why are you telling me this now?" A long pause. Then, "Because I didn't sleep for 3 nights after. And I just saw your foundation in the paper." Marjorie's breath steadied. "I think I'm ready to put it in writing," the woman said. The invitations were printed on cream cardstock, understated and unadorned. "In loving memory of Alan James Hale, Community Memorial, Saturday, 10 hours on AM, the Hale Foundation grounds, Santa Fe." Each envelope was addressed by hand. Former students, neighbors, old colleagues from Alan's days at the vocational school, Marines from his unit, even the hospice nurse who had brought him extra pudding when his appetite vanished. No one from Tanner or Kara's circle was invited. By Saturday morning, folding chairs stretched in clean rows beneath white canvas tents. The breeze smelled of juniper and sun-warmed stone. Noelle moved between tables, setting out cards marked, "Leave a memory, share a truth. This garden blooms from both." Delia stood near the back, clipboard in hand, scanning the perimeter like she was guarding a sacred perimeter. She nodded once to Marjorie when their eyes met. Marjorie wore slate blue, no black, no veil. She stood straight-backed at the podium beneath the desert willow, where Alan now rested. His headstone gleamed in the light, like it belonged there. A slideshow played on a small screen beside her. Alan fishing. Alan laughing on a picnic blanket. Alan holding Noelle on his shoulders at the botanical gardens. Alan helping Marjorie stain a new bookshelf, his hand resting on hers. Not a single frame included Tanner. Not one image bore Kara's eyes, and no one asked why. The guests stood silent, watching the reel loop through decades of quiet devotion. A few people wiped their cheeks. One woman whispered to her partner, "I didn't know he taught woodshop. Look at that grin." When the projector faded to black, Marjorie stepped to the mic. She didn't eulogize. She didn't recount war stories or favorite meals. She just said, "Alan lived honestly. That's all I ever wanted for him, and that's what this moment is for." Then she stepped down. Noelle took her place, gently motioning toward the tables of memory cards. "Tell us your story of him, not the headline version. The real one. That's the one that matters." People lined up quietly. Pens moved in gentle rhythms. The donation box beside the cards filled faster than expected. Check after check addressed to the Alan Hale Foundation. Midway through, Marjorie caught sight of him, Tanner, standing just beyond the far row of tents, sunglasses pushed high on his face, jaw set like cracked stone. His hands were jammed in his pockets, feet frozen to the ground. He didn't approach the podium, didn't speak, but when he stepped toward the chairs, Dalia was already moving. She walked with a quiet finality, two uniformed security volunteers behind her. No theatrics, no raised voices. "Mr. Hale," she said coolly, "this gathering is private. You are not on the list." "I'm his son," Tanner muttered. "I have a right to." "You had rights," Dalia said. "Now you have distance." He hesitated, then turned back toward the road, disappearing behind a hedge of blooming sage. No one followed. Afterward, Marjorie sat in her office, surrounded by memory cards. A stack of letters, each folded once and tucked into envelopes, all addressed to her, not to the family, not to the Hales, but to her. She opened the top drawer of her desk. Inside were two thick folders. One bore Tanner's name, printed in black on the front, with all the old paperwork from the original estate plan, successor trustee, power of attorney, listed heir. The second folder was new. It read, "Noelle Hale, sole beneficiary, durable executor, trust custodian." Marjorie took the first folder and slid it into a fireproof box, marked void. Then she placed the second at the center of the drawer. She shut it with a soft click. No announcement, no confrontation, just a clean, permanent transfer. At that same moment, Emmett, miles away in his office, received an email notification, "Beneficiary status updated, property title transfer recorded." Tanner's name was gone. Later that night, Marjorie stepped onto the porch to find Noelle curled up under a blanket, a mug of cider in her hands. The stars blinked down as if in quiet applause. "I didn't know how much of him they'd tried to erase," Noelle said. "You do now," Marjorie replied, "and you'll make sure no one does it again." Inside, the phone rang once. Marjorie ignored it. Outside, the Foundation's welcome page updated in real time. A new message flashed in gold. "Founded by the widow they tried to silence. Powered by the girl who watched her rise." The notary's stamp echoed softly in the kitchen, louder than it should have. Marjorie watched the ink settle, then lifted the pen and signed her name, beneath the new deed. Life estate beneficiary, Marjorie Ann Hale. Remainder beneficiary, Noelle Whitman Hale. Emmett glanced up from across the table, hands folded. "Once this is recorded with the county, it's untouchable. No probate, no challenge. The house will move straight to her, no loopholes." "Good," Marjorie said. She looked over at Noelle, who was already digging through a box, labeled entryway, paint paw photos. Noelle grinned. "Permission to modernize the front hall." Marjorie allowed herself the smallest smile. as long as you leave the fireplace, and Alan's frame goes up first. Noelle held it carefully, an old black and white photo from their honeymoon, Alan in sunglasses, and Marjorie in a wide sun hat, both smiling like time didn't matter yet. They painted that afternoon, soft ivory over the old adobe tan. By sunset, the entryway looked like new. Clean, lived in, claimed. The photo of her and Alan hung beside the door, framed in copper. Beneath it, Noelle added a brass placard. Founders, fighters, family. Elsewhere, Kara was trying to rewrite history. A listing had appeared on a local genealogy forum, the Hale family plot, available for future generational use. Contact Kara Hale, family spokesperson. She had attached photos of the temporary grave, cropped carefully. No mention of the reburial. It lasted just one day. Delia forwarded the listing to the New Mexico Board of Funeral Services and attached the falsified documents as an addendum. An hour later, the post vanished. That evening, Delia called Marjorie with a short update. They're calling it a reputational concern, she said, but it's being flagged as an ethics violation. There will be a hearing. Marjorie didn't sound surprised. They should be careful. Memory has witnesses now. The next morning, the Santa Fe Senior Advocacy Council emailed with an unexpected request. We would like to present you with our annual Dignity and Legacy Award. Attached was a note from the board chair. You showed us what strength looks like after silence, what justice looks like in small, steady steps. Noelle burst into applause when she read it aloud. They see you, Grandma. Marjorie nodded, but her expression was distant, watchful, something simmering behind her eyes. Later that afternoon, she opened her laptop and began to type. It wasn't a legal letter, not a eulogy, not even for the foundation, just a public statement, short, sharp, and titled in bold, "Here's how to bury dignity and how to dig it back up." She wrote, "They took my voice when they took my place beside my husband. They wrote a story that excluded the truth, hoping the ground would keep it quiet. But grief doesn't make you weak. It makes you precise. So I found my voice. I found the records. I found the facts. And then I found my way back to the place where my name never should have been erased. I'm not here to destroy anyone. I'm here to restore one man's dignity and my own." She hit publish. The post went live on the Foundation's blog and was shared by the local Senior Alliance, a military spouses network, and a grief recovery nonprofit before dinner. By morning, her inbox was full again, but this time no condolences, no apologies, just thank yous, and one short message from a woman in Flagstaff. "I didn't know how much I'd let them silence me, until I watched you speak." Marjorie closed her laptop and walked out to the garden, where Noelle was weeding near the base of the memorial tree. "I didn't ask for any of this," Marjorie said. "I know," Noelle replied. "You just didn't run from it." Before Marjorie could answer, her phone buzzed. A text from Emmett. "Heard from the ethics board. You'll want to sit down." Marjorie sat beside Emmett's office window as morning light spilled across a leather portfolio. The sun was warm, but her shoulders stayed squared, hands folded in her lap as if she were still standing at Alan's grave. Emmett flipped through the new draft of her will, nodding at each section with a muted hum of approval. Then he paused. "Ready for this part?" he asked, tapping the final page with the back of his pen. Marjorie gave one slow nod. "Read it aloud." He cleared his throat and recited evenly. "To Tanner Allen Hale, I leave no property, no fiduciary role, and no claim to the estate of Alan James Hale or the undersigned. This disinheritance is intentional, final, and not subject to challenge under any statute." He looked up. "It's clean, legally sealed. He's mentioned once by name only. That's your boundary drawn in ink." Marjorie studied the page like it was a photograph of something she'd once lost and finally recovered. Then she signed it. Emmett sat back in his chair. "You've made your boundaries clear," he said. "That's legal gold." By noon, the paperwork was notarized, scanned, and couriered to the county recorder's office. Tanner's legacy, once assumed, now officially erased. That afternoon, Kara tried a different angle. She sent a message to Noelle. short, syrupy, and patronizing. "Hey, sweet girl, I know things have been weird lately. Just wanted to say I'm here if you ever want to talk through all this. Families go through seasons. Call me?" Noelle stared at it for a moment, then tapped the screen. Block. Confirm. She didn't even mention it to Marjorie. That evening, a bouquet of wild sunflowers and yarrow appeared on the front step. No return address, just a card inside. "You honored him beautifully. I hope someone fights for me like that someday. Annie." Marjorie ran a thumb along the edge of the card and set it gently inside Alan's old cigar box, now repurposed to hold tributes that mattered. At dusk, she slipped on her walking shoes and grabbed a light shawl. She didn't tell Noelle where she was going. She didn't need to. The cemetery was empty when she arrived. The air was warm but turning, carrying a hint of fall. The headstone caught the last of the day's gold as she stepped through the garden path lined with low desert marigold. She didn't. Instead, she sat on the small stone bench beside Alan's grave, the one Noelle had installed 2 weeks earlier. It bore a single line etched in brass, "Where loyalty never dies." Marjorie reached into her pocket and pulled out a smooth oval stone, the same kind Alan used to skip across lakes when they were younger. She placed it carefully at the base of the headstone. "Everything's settled now," she whispered. A gust of wind stirred the trees and one leaf fluttered down onto the stone beside her. She looked up at the stars just beginning to show in the fading light, and for the first time in months, maybe years, she smiled. But she didn't rise right away. Her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. She pulled it out, half expecting it to be Noelle or Emmett. But the screen showed a number with an Austin area code. She hesitated. "Answer." "Mrs. Hale?" The voice was unfamiliar. Young, nervous. "Yes? My name is Luke Barron. I used to work with Kara on the Community Development Board here in Travis County." Marjorie's body stilled. "I didn't know how involved she was in. But your article, your statement, someone sent it to me. And I think you should see what she submitted under your name last year." The next morning, Marjorie stood barefoot in the back bedroom, staring at the wall safe. It was hidden behind a painting Alan had made their first winter in Santa Fe, sunset across the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, all long strokes and soft reds. She hadn't opened it in over a year. The key turned stiffly. Inside, beneath passports, land titles, and their wedding rings sealed in a velvet pouch, sat a manila folder labeled in blocky, all-capital handwriting, "For MJ, if I'm gone first." Marjorie sat on the edge of the bed and opened it slowly. Inside were 3 things: an updated insurance policy listing, Marjorie and Noelle as sole beneficiaries, dated 8 months before Alan passed; a typed page clipped to a legal pad sheet in Alan's handwriting, detailing Tanner's erratic behavior over the past year; a missed mortgage payment, a shady business loan Alan had quietly declined, and a recording device Alan had discovered hidden in his workshop. And at the back, a draft of a letter, unsigned, unsent, addressed to Marjorie. "I don't want to think it'll come to this, but if they push you out, if they lie or cheat to get their hands on what we built, I need you to know you have my blessing to fight. And if you're reading this, I know you did." She held the letter against her chest and closed her eyes. Then she placed all 3 documents into a fireproof envelope and walked it down to the foundation office, where the official trust archive lived, digitized and time-stamped. By the end of the day, it was scanned, encrypted, and stored under a new category: Contributor Alan James Hale. Source: Primary. That same evening, Delia called. "I've been invited to speak on a state ethics panel next quarter," she said. "Funeral licensing reforms, consent protocol updates. They want real stories." Marjorie listened, then replied calmly, "Then give them one." "You'd be open to that?" "I didn't fight in secret just to disappear quietly," she said. "Use it, every word of it." Delia exhaled, a mix of gratitude and quiet resolve. "We'll make sure they know how deep this goes." The next morning, Kara tried again. This time, it wasn't a letter or voicemail, it was a carefully typed email with attached reflections, framed in saccharine remorse. Her language danced around responsibility. I realize now I was just trying to protect the family from further grief. I hope there's space to forgive how I handled things. We were all doing our best under pressure. Marjorie read it once, then typed 2 words back. Noted. She didn't click send. She printed it, slipped it into a manila envelope and filed it under the tab labeled Attempts to Rewrite. She would not be baited into performance. That afternoon, Noelle stayed late in the memorial garden. She wore her grandfather's old gardening hat and knelt beside a cluster of purple sage, carefully separating the healthy shoots from the withered ones. A woman passed by, mid-40s, holding a cup of coffee and a folded program from the memorial event. "You volunteering?" she asked. Noelle nodded. "Every weekend. That your grandpa?" the woman said, nodding toward the willow. "He was." The woman smiled. "He must have been something. I've never seen a place so full of stories." Noelle smiled back, then turned her attention to the soil. That evening, Marjorie opened her email to find an attached PDF from Luke Barron in Austin. It was a scanned application submitted to a Texas Community Development grant under her name. But the signature wasn't hers. Attached were emails between Kara and the board, misrepresenting Marjorie as an advisor, her foundation as a collaborative fund, and the Hale family as deeply aligned and unified. The grant amount $14,200. The date of submission 2 months before Alan died. Below it all, Kara had signed submitted with full family consent. Marjorie didn't curse. She didn't shake. She downloaded the file, renamed it Forged Hale Statement Final, DTF, and sent it to Emmett with a single subject line: "This goes to the board." The stage was small, just a raised wooden platform beneath a shade sail on the west lawn of the Veterans Memorial Center. Folding chairs fanned out in quiet rows. Most were already filled. Marjorie stood off to the side, watching as the final name was read aloud from the roll call of the departed. Alan's name was last. Staff Sergeant Alan James Hale, United States Marine Corps, 1947 to 2025. There was a soft murmur of aura from somewhere in the third row, then silence. When the moderator called her name, Marjorie stepped forward, a slim folder in her hands. She didn't bring a speech, just a timeline. She adjusted the mic. "My husband served 22 years. He fought in Vietnam, built prosthetics for injured soldiers when he came home, and taught high school kids how to plane a board straight enough to build their lives on." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. "And when he died, they buried him without me." The silence that followed was heavy, but it held. She unfolded the timeline. This is what it looked like. She listed the dates: the unauthorized burial, the falsified consent forms, the exhumation, the cease and desist, the reburial, the forged grant submission under her name, and finally, the clause that removed her son from her estate forever. "And through it all," she said, "I was told to stay quiet, to move on, to let it go." She looked up, her voice steady. "But silence is where abuse survives, and I decided not to give it a home." She stepped back. No applause followed, just stillness. Then slowly, people began to rise. First a man in uniform, then an elderly woman with a cane, then the entire front row. The moment was weight without drama, respect made physical. Later that night, the KRQE headline ran online: "Widow moves husband's resting place to restore dignity, sparks legal reform effort," underneath a photo of Marjorie at the podium, wind catching the edge of her scarf. No embellishment, no clickbait, just truth. By Monday morning, Tanner's professional network had seen the article. Screenshots circulated quietly. Group chats, boardrooms, emails with subject lines like, "Did you know this was his mother? Yikes. Not a good look. He lost a board seat at his financial firm. A client called to pause a contract indefinitely." Across state lines, Kara faced a different reckoning. The Travis County Community Board voted 6-1 to remove her from her advisory role. Conflict of interest. Document forgery under review. When asked for a statement, Kara reportedly replied, "No comment," but the message had already arrived, and it didn't come from courts or lawyers. It came from consequence. That afternoon, Emmett arrived at Marjorie's with a folder in his briefcase, and a calm in his voice she hadn't heard in months. "It's done," he said, laying the papers on the kitchen table. The filings are complete. The trust is irrevocable. Title transfers. Executor status. Everything's concrete. Marjorie stared at the seal on the final page. That word, she said quietly. Irrevocable. It sounds like cement. Emmett gave a small nod. That's what it's meant to be. She ran her fingers over the embossed seal. Then I can rest too. But she didn't sit down. She walked to the window instead and watched Noelle in the garden, trimming dead leaves off the memorial vines. A few younger volunteers had joined her. College students from the local grief center, a retired nurse who'd sent a donation last week. They were laughing about something. Marjorie opened the window just enough to let the sound drift in. It smelled like rosemary and turned soil. Inside her inbox, a new message pinged from a national family law journal. Subject: we'd like to feature your foundation as a case study in ethical recovery. The wind moved through the rosemary like breath, stirring the leaves with a whisper only old things understood. Marjorie walked the garden path alone. No jacket, no scarf, no purse, just her in soft-soled shoes, her hands tucked calmly into the sleeves of her sweater. The light was descending slowly, bleeding through the sky in deep peach and gold, the kind Alan would have called the color of memory. Each step took her past what had bloomed: purple sage, black-eyed Susans, desert marigold. They'd grown wilder since the first planting, more confident. She stopped at the base of the willow tree. Its canopy arched above her now, heavy with late summer green. The soil had hardened beneath the bench. Noelle was already there. She looked up as Marjorie approached, gave a small nod, and shifted to the side. The space between them was comfortable now, not fragile, not tense, just understood. The bench gleamed in the slanted light. Its new plaque read, "Where loyalty never died." They sat quietly for a while, no words, just the evening folding itself around them like a blanket. Then from the edge of the gravel path came the sound of deliberate steps. Deal. She was in navy again, heels dusted from the walk, a thick envelope in her hand. "It came this morning," she said, offering it with both hands. Marjorie stood to accept it. Inside was a printout, heavy stock paper, embossed and signed by the monument company. Attached was a photo, Alan's final headstone, now complete, now permanent. Clean granite, dark slate lettering, no frills. Alan James Hale, Staff Sergeant, USMC, 1947-2025. Husband, grandfather, builder of peace. His wishes were honored. Marjorie looked up slowly, her eyes tracing nothing and everything at once. "Do you want to go see it?" Delia asked. But Marjorie shook her head. "It's already here." She tapped her chest, then looked down at the paper one last time, before folding it along the natural crease and sliding it into her back pocket. She turned toward the headstone that had been there all along, the one they'd already visited, touched, wept beside. She reached out and ran her fingers along the engraving once more, not to confirm it, just to feel it. It was real. It was done. "I was there for the first breath," she said quietly, "and I stood for the last." Noelle blinked quickly, her jaw tightening, but she didn't cry, not anymore. Her hand rested gently on the edge of the bench. Delia gave them space, stepping back down the path, with the reverence of someone exiting a sacred room. The light shifted again, just slightly now, the way it does in the last minute, before true dusk. Marjorie turned and walked back toward the house. Inside, she placed the envelope on the table, then reached for her old leather-bound journal, the one Alan had given her after their 25th anniversary, still marked with little ink blots and crooked margins. She hadn't opened it since the morning after the funeral, but now she did. She flipped to a blank page near the back, took the pen, paused, then she wrote, "What you protect says who you are. What you preserve says who you loved. What you reclaim says you were never gone." She stared at the ink as it dried. Then gently, without ceremony, she turned to the final page and wrote one more word, "Done." Her phone buzzed once. She looked at the screen. A name appeared she hadn't seen in years, and for the first time she didn't hesitate to answer. The photo hung in a slim black frame beside the fireplace. Simple, unpolished, intentional. Two images side by side, On the left, the first sight, gray and sunless, the headstone crooked in the wind, a scrap of tape barely visible beneath the plaque. Letter was still there, faded, weathered, untouched. On the right, the final grave. The willow bowed low above the stone, casting soft shadow. There were flowers tucked at the base, wild bouquets that changed with the seasons. Visitors still came. Some left notes, others just touched the bench and stood in silence. Marjorie dusted the frame once with her sleeve, then left it alone. That afternoon, Delia texted a photo of the old burial site. The taped letter, still in place, had started to curl at the corners, but hadn't peeled. Beneath it, someone had left a small white stone etched with the word heard. Marjorie didn't reply. She didn't need to. People had started to visit the correct grave more frequently. Not because of the news stories, not even because of the foundation, but because of word of mouth. Quiet truth, unshakable and slow. Every few days, someone would come to the garden. They left folded notes or fresh blooms. One woman knelt and prayed. Another read aloud from a small Bible. None of them asked permission. The story had moved past anger, past correction, into reverence. In early October, Tanner moved to Colorado. No fanfare, no announcement. The house he once shared with Kara sold under a trust-managed name. Local acquaintances only learned of his departure when they received updated contact information from an email alias that included no surname. Marjorie marked the move in her calendar, then closed the book. She didn't speak of him again. Kara's silence was even louder. The last attempt at appeal had been denied. Her name no longer appeared on any board registry. The ethics committee quietly finalized their findings. No criminal charges, but a reputation left ash gray. Noelle, meanwhile, had started interning with Emmett's firm. She shadowed document reviews, sat in on will structuring sessions, and had already been invited to take the paralegal exam by spring. "I didn't know I liked this kind of thing," she told Marjorie one night over dinner. "You like knowing the rules," Marjorie said, sipping tea. "Because you've seen what happens when people break them." With a smile, Noelle nodded. "I like knowing how to hold the line." By mid-November, the last of the garden's summer bloom had faded. The sage browned, the marigold crisped, the willow dropped its first round of leaves, one by one, like breath exhaled after a hard goodbye. Marjorie sat on the bench beneath it with a fleece shawl around her shoulders. Her knees ached more than usual. Her handwriting had stiffened in recent weeks, but she felt for the first time in years that her body was not at war with the life around it, that she had earned her place in stillness. She looked out across the rows of planted memory and breathed deep. The garden didn't need her now. That was the point. She walked back to the house slowly, pausing once at the front steps. The framed photo caught the setting sun. The left image glowed gray and bruised. The right, soft gold. Inside, she lit a candle. The scent was cedar and citrus, Ellen's favorite. She poured one small glass of whiskey, sat on the couch, and opened the last page of her journal. Not to write, but to read. She ran her finger once across the final word she'd written days earlier. Done. Outside, a car pulled into the gravel lot. One of the new volunteers. They waved toward the house, and Marjorie raised a hand in return. She didn't need to walk down again. Not tonight. She already knew what the headstone said, what the bench said, what the records said, what every hand-laid stone and flower had whispered now, over and over. She knew what the truth cost, and what it bought back. She took one last sip of her drink, leaned back into the cushion, and let the candlelight flicker across her face. Then she spoke, soft as dusk. "They buried him without asking. I brought him home without permission."